It's, the research that has happened and that is continuing to happen within this drowning prevention sector is growing. There's better understanding on behavior. There's better understanding about access. And then there's also research that is very focused on specific areas that perhaps need a little bit more support so that the program or the training systems can grow. I think there's two words for me that come up when I think about how do we bridge research and how do we make it applicable to the operators, for example. I think it's about simplicity and it's about relevance.
Welcome to AOAP's discussion from the Deep Ed podcast, where we share real stories and practical ideas to help you run safer, stronger aquatic programs and facilities. I'm Daniel Peters, your host, and I am accompanied today by our co-host, Kirsten Barnes. AOAP is a nonprofit dedicated to improving aquatic education, recreation, and safety through training, resources, and community. Today, we'll talk not only about the global perspective Nathalie brings to this work, but also about how research, communication, and collaboration can help aquatic professionals make better operational decisions in their own facilities and communities. Whether you work in a municipal pool, water park, Y, or university, we hope you walk away with the ideas you can apply right away.
Nathalie Martin is a dynamic communications executive, nonprofit advocate, and strategic visionary. She's managed multi-million-dollar budgets, advised senior leaders, built cross-sector alliances, and championed life-saving initiatives globally. From her legislative advocacy work in Florida to her leadership within the Swim Global Project to her research and contributions at Life Saving Society Canada, Nathalie has made an impact across government, academia, nonprofit spaces, and beyond. We're really excited to have her here to share her insights from her journey across continents, cultures, and causes.
Nathalie, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your work across the different regions of the world and how those experiences have shaped the way you think about the aquatic safety, communication, and prevention?
Amazing. Well, thanks for having me. What an introduction. So my work really does come up. I've done a lot of work, not only in North America, but in Latin America specifically and in Africa. I've also worked with collaborators from Europe, Australia, even Asia. And I think that over the last 3 decades, really, we think the world is so big. And really what this has done for me in my type of work is that it's really reinforced the idea that we are so much smaller than we think, and we have so much in common. So my work really focuses on bridging the gap between people who are in the field in advocacy, in doing the work in programming, and then bringing that closer to sharing stories. So right now with the Swim Global Project, the idea with this project is that I get to share stories from around the world. And that to me is such a fulfilling thing to do right now, because there are hundreds of advocates around the world, hundreds and thousands of advocates and programmers that are just doing the work. And so they need someone to reach out to say, hey, check it out. I'm in Nigeria. This is what I'm doing. And to share those stories. So that's the big bulk of what I'm doing right now with the Swim Global Project. Of course, like in my consulting business, I work with several NGOs and nonprofits that work in international aid. So that gap or that intersection between international aid, drowning prevention work, and public health is really closely tied. And so when I launched the Swim Global Project, the idea was that we need somewhere where these individuals from around the world can come together, network, share their stories, and really feel that they're being supported and starting a different type of conversation.
I love it. So you've talked about really working globally. You've worked in over 20 countries. You've worked with various cultures. What's one challenge or pattern that you've seen consistently across communities when it comes to water safety?
That's such a great question. I think what I see most often is that there are issues that are deeply rooted when it comes to access, when it comes to awareness, and even when it comes to assumptions. Like I mentioned, the language around drowning prevention is very similar all around the world. And so what I'm seeing, especially as I'm bringing individuals together from around the world under the Swim Global project, is that there's a lot of lack of infrastructure. Whether you're in North America, whether you're in Africa, of course, the resources are slightly different. But when I've worked where people live in or around water, oftentimes they don't know how to swim. They don't know, where to get that information. Or even when I've worked in areas where facilities are world class, a lot of the good practices that we try to advocate are ignored.
I think we hear those conversations here at home every day, right?
And it's coming from a place where you don't really know anybody else is experiencing these issues because you're so kind of, I don't want to say self-centered, but you're focused on your facility and what's going on in your organization. So you've had the opportunity to work in both legislative and grassroots spaces. How did you kind of begin to identify your voice and advocacy that could make the greatest impact?
Oh, great question. One of the things that I try to do and that I've learned to do, because this doesn't happen overnight, is really trying, first of all, to understand the community that I'm living in, but then understand the communities that others are living in as well, and understanding what they're trying to shape around drowning prevention and water safety. I think that the biggest thing for me has been to try to understand behavior, try to understand the culture, and really try to see how people are actually interacting with water in their daily lives. And I think if we miss that, even the best programs are going to fall short. So to answer your question around um, you know, how do I bring legislation into the community, or how do I get that part of the conversation going, is again, it takes time to identify where the gaps are in our communities and what those challenges are. And I think we just really need to pay attention. I think that we live in a very fast paced, as you know, we live in a very fast paced time in our lives. And people want quick access. But as advocates, we have to step back a little bit and really look at the big picture. And I think we also have to try to figure out who are those stakeholders that can help us move that conversation so that we can have an impact. And again, that takes time to identify.
Something that you said really resonated with me. How do you work to put your own personal, maybe biases isn't the right word, but your own personal experiences and privileges to the side so that you can really connect with people as you're trying to understand their goals and how they're approaching these things?
Oh my gosh, that is such a fair question, because we know that many of us come from a perspective of privilege. And sometimes I didn't realize that perspective of privilege until I started working with underserved communities. And for me, as you know, I'm originally from Canada, and I worked a lot with the Life Saving Society. And I was fortunate to be giving opportunities to work in underserved communities. I went as far north um, in Nunavut, which is far Arctic, to Venezuela and to the far south. And I saw exactly what the impact was when communities just didn't have a concept of what it meant to be safe around water. And the other thing for me, when someone asks me, hey, when did you learn to swim? I actually don't remember not knowing how to swim. And so as the decades, pass, when I started living in the US, we always knew that there were barriers around access. We always knew that race also played into why certain communities did not learn how to swim. But I really got into that history part when I started living in Florida. And it started really resonating that, hey, I don't have to go to the Caribbean. I don't have to go to the Bahamas to understand where that history and that barrier exists, that so many communities for generations did not learn how to swim. And so again, I think you have to be able to look at the history. You have to be able to understand, again, going back to that culture and behavior. Because for me, right, when we're 16, 17, we become lifeguards really because it's so much fun. We want to be part of that identity. But what I often say is that I'm staying and doing this work because of the mission. And I had to educate and almost re-educate myself throughout the last decade to fully grasp the impact of what generational barriers caused to so many communities that do not have access or never learned to swim. And so from an international perspective, when I look at even programs in the Caribbean, I've even shifted a little bit of my mindset. We know that ecotourism has always been, very popular, but I think we're shifting that type of work instead of saying, hey, I'm going to go into a community for 2 weeks and teach everyone either how to swim or get them certified as lifeguards. Instead, we're looking at it from how do we build a sustainable program that has the most capacity without us coming into a community and then leaving? How do we make sure that, these communities have resources? So it's very complex. I think I had to relearn how to do things in the sense of making assumptions about communities. I think that when I launched the Swim Global project, I didn't really grasp how much I would learn from the individuals that are involved in the Swim Global project. I had an idea, but then, as you know, I have ambassadors all over the world. I have about 45 ambassadors. And what they're showing us is that they're doing so much with so little in some cases. And so that's been a really big learning for me.
That's really amazing to be able to kind of let our perspectives grow outside of what we know, as Daniel said earlier. Part of that is you talked about disparities, barriers, all of those things. We know the data is there. And one thing that we have really been talking about, especially for the last year at AOAP, is how to take that data, how to take other research that's out there or insights, and how do we actually apply it in real world settings. From your perspective, what helps bridge that gap between research and data into actual action?
Again, it's, the research that has happened and that is continuing to happen within this drowning prevention sector is growing. There's better understanding on behavior. There's better understanding about access. And then there's also research that is very focused on specific areas that perhaps need a little bit more support so that the program or the training systems can grow. I think there's two words for me that come up when I think about how do we bridge research and how do we make it, applicable to the operators, for example. I think it's about simplicity and it's about relevance. Is if you have researchers sharing their information and sharing their findings, it's fantastic. I think it's great that we're having these conversations. But if they're not able to then translate what they are finding into kind of like that real world language, then you lose the individuals or the organizations that are actually going to apply that research. For example, if there's research regarding improving some aspects of lifeguard curriculum or lifeguard training, but if that research doesn't seem quite relevant, or if the research shows that it's going to be very difficult to implement, for example, there could be research out there right now that states the best lifeguard ratio for safety and prevention is 8 lifeguards to 1 swimmer. Fantastic. And, they identify why that works. Well, in a real world, we know that that is very unrealistic that we're going to be able to have one lifeguard to 8 swimmers. So I'm just giving you a very simple example. Again, I think that we need to make sure that the research is being translated so that someone or organizations that are able to look at that information can actually say, yes, this makes sense, this is relevant, and this is how we can apply the findings.
You talk about those two words, simplicity and relevance. I think those resonate so much with every organization, no matter the size or what they're even doing, whether it's a water park or a pool. It kind of bridges it all together. Like, can you walk us through what your approach is for building those large scale initiatives, whether it's drowning prevention campaign, a partnership effort, or even a community driven project? Where's the starting point?
Well, the starting point is to identify that there's an issue or that there's a problem or that there's a gap, right, that exists. So that's the first thing. And again, my guiding principle, because through the Swim Global Project and a lot of the work that I'm doing now, my guiding principle is to keep things, again, simple, but keep things low cost or low resourced, but that have the most impact, right? So that's how I kind of start with when I look at a project or a potential program. So that's the first thing. Keep things really low resourced if possible, but what can have the most impact? And then from there, I really look at who are some of the stakeholders who can benefit from being at the table from the very beginning of a conversation or from the very beginning of a project. And so, you do all that mapping to make sure that you got to have those individuals at the table from the beginning. Very rarely have I seen large scale projects that end up being quite successful by having people come in midway. We know that that's very disruptive, and perhaps there's people that have different agendas and different priorities. So by starting off with having everyone at the table, and I often say this, I've built business networks and other networks, you'll never take away from your priority by bringing somebody else to sit next to you at the table. I have not seen that happen. I think there's a little bit of gatekeeping when it comes to research. I think there's a little bit of gatekeeping when it comes to maybe some of the work that we're doing in aquatics. Of course, we know there's, funding sometimes that is very, very small in some areas. So when it comes to new initiatives, there might be a little bit of, I wouldn't say fighting, but there's definitely tension around initiatives that require funding and, of course, some politics. But on a smaller scale, I think it's really important that stakeholders feel that they have a voice. These are your partners. And then you really have to understand what is the outcome that you want? What is the outcome that you want out of your program or your project before you get started? And you have to have a really strong leader that can bring through basically all of those tasks and all of those projects to fruition, and very clear communication. Again, it starts really from the start.
You talked about different stakeholders who have different ideas and potentially different agendas coming into a project, and that, as many of us know, can derail a project very quickly. But you also talked about making sure that everyone's clear on the outcome and that's aligned. Have you run into situations where some of those different competing agendas internally have started to take your overall goals off track? And how have you kind of reined that back in?
Well, I mean, I think it's through clarity and communication and not being
Yeah.
afraid, right, to have difficult conversations. I mean, ultimately, if you're the individual that's responsible for some of these initiatives, you need to be able to have those difficult conversations. And I think that oftentimes miscommunication or misinterpretation is what causes some of these problems. Also, when we try to overcomplicate initiatives, I think that's where people, right, become confused. And so I would say that those are the two things for me that often have been the issue where things become maybe a little bit difficult, is where there's assumptions made and then not wanting to have difficult conversations. And so I think that if we want to succeed, especially in this sector, we really need to be honest, right? And we need to be open minded and we need to be flexible, because it is true that sometimes priorities will change. I mean, larger scale projects, maybe you're going to have a new stakeholder that has to be involved at some point in your project, might not be happy about it, but then how do you stay flexible? How do you maintain the big picture? And I think communication, lack of communication, making things really confusing, and having a lack of clarity, I think is what causes most problems. That's what comes to mind, anyways, right now.
Yeah. And you talked about the simplicity of it and taking the chances and doing these different things. What's one thing you've tried along the way that maybe has been a simple fix that has even worked out better than you probably expected that it would?
Oh, that's a great one. I'm thinking. Well, I mean, a good example is with the research committee, for example, that we're working to develop here at AOAP. I think that I tried when we first started talking about what this committee would look like and what some of the priorities would be. I really try to keep it simple. I think that when we try to overcomplicate things, that's when sometimes projects fail and that's where people start to disengage. I think that when you try to keep, again, really understanding the end goal, and also understanding that everybody has their own strengths, and that projects are not about you. Projects about the collective. And so that's a really good frame of mind. That's my mindset, is that with this AOAP research committee, this not Natalie's committee. It's not necessarily Kristen's committee. It's really all of our committee. And we're doing collective work so that in a year from now, we can see what we've accomplished. And if I overcomplicate things, or if my asks or the tasks get really complicated or confusing, again, going back to communication and clarity, I think that's where people start to disengage. And again, not being afraid to be honest. If things are not working out with, someone you're working with, have those tough conversations. Also, make sure that you have regular check-ins, that there's, shared language around the work that you're doing. Yeah, that's what I want to say on that one.
I love it. Also, I'm so excited about the research committee. You have so many good people in this group and you all have clarity on where you're going. I'm just very excited about it. I think a year from now, the conversation we have around this is just going to be life-changing for people in the field. But I digress. um, so you've been doing this a while. Were there any strategies or outreach methods that you thought, this is it? This is gonna be a hit, and they just did not land the way that you thought they would?
Yeah. And I just realized with the last question, it was asked about like, how did things turn out better than expected? Certainly with the work that we do, I know that this word comes up often, is that we work in silos, and that, we keep the people we know within our own groups and within our own projects. And what I found, what works well, what has been working well, is that inviting organizations or individuals from outside the typical sort of aquatic circle actually makes from really diverse conversation. So that's been really interesting to me, is that, those different perspectives, and people have different ideas on how to get things done. And that really excites me. On the flip side, I think that assuming that there's good information out there will automatically change behavior. I think for me, that's been, a big learning, is that, oh, the information is there. That should be enough to change behavior. And we know that it doesn't. We know that people don't act just because something's true, right? So I think, again, when something doesn't work out, I think we have to go back to the drawing board, or however wherever that is placed. And we have to consider people's habits. We have to consider, the community environment. And I think a big shift for me over the last couple of decades has been realizing that communication is just as important as the message itself. So we could have a ton of posters out there, um, with water safety education, and we still get drownings or we still have accidents. And so I think that we have to look at all the processes and see, did we do the right thing by just putting out posters? How is that message being delivered? And so I would say, when it comes to community activation, you have to be really careful on what you communicate, how you communicate, and really, again, going back to that end result, what is the behavior you want out of your community? And so we know that that takes a really long time to change behavior. Um, One of the things in Florida that we're trying to do, is telling people, like, swim where there are lifeguards, right? But we have to be repetitive and we have to demonstrate why swimming where there are lifeguards is a benefit to you. So multi-layered, everything is multi-layered in what we do.
Yeah, and all communities are so different too in the respects that they're from the top bottom. It's how they go about things and their decision making and just their openness to receive just that data and that information. So I think it starts with the leaders for sure and getting them on board. But you're multilingual. You work across different cultures. How do
Mhm.
you bring those communities, those leaders, and other partner organizations on board with that shared vision?
Again, like, I don't make it about myself at all. I think it's really important that you meet people where they are. Again, doing your homework, you don't make assumptions. So you really have to meet people where they are. This means understanding what their priorities are, understanding what their constraints are. And sometimes you have to try to understand what their skepticism is, right? So, as you know, I co-lead the Florida Water Smart Task Force, which is the statewide coalition for water safety. And in Florida, like every other state, it's so diverse and there's so many different types of people at the table that you really have to have such a great understanding of where these organizations and people are coming from. And I personally, and I've learned this along the way, believe me, like when I started off in my career, I mean, I was going in with my agenda and saying, hey, this is how we're going to do it. And that blew up in my face. Like, this is like from learning, been doing this for 3 decades. So thinking, I had to prove myself at that boardroom meeting and I had to, tell people how or share with people how much I knew when in fact, it was the opposite. I've learned that I want to know where people are coming from. I want to understand what their community is all about. And really, it's about listening more. Honestly, it's about listening more, maybe talking a little less. Um, and that's how I connect. That's how I connect now. But believe me, I had moments in my career where I was like, wow, that just did not go well. Sometimes ego comes in the way.
Oh, true story.
True story. True story. Sadly.
You talked about community activation, and Daniel asked you about how you're bringing leaders together. Some of the time, for aquatic professionals in the field, they are the professional voice, they are the experts. So, for those aquatic professionals who are listening right now, translating what we know so that other people can hear it, whether it's the people who hold the purse strings in our organization or the people in our community who need the information, is really important. So, how can aquatic professionals take this broader research, prevention insights, and then use them to inform staffing, training, supervision, public education at the local level?
Yeah, and you just mentioned so many things, right? I think for aquatic professionals, especially those that are starting or midway or wherever you are in that journey, I really think you still have to start small and make it actionable. A lot of times we hear from people in the field that I just have too many things. I don't know what my priorities are. I feel like I have 20 priorities. Well, if you can try to bring those down into actionable items, pick one insight and ask yourself, how does this change how I operate tomorrow? Right? So if it's about, okay, well, I need $1 million. If not, I can't, offer this swim program. If you're focusing on that one problem or that one, aspect of either the research that's been done, well, that's not going to help you tomorrow. So I think when you look at the research and you're given, tools, or you're given ideas, or even given ideas on how to perform training or lifeguard recruitment, or create safety plans. Take a look at everything that is presented and look at it from a very small lens. Look at it from, what can I implement tomorrow? So obviously there's some stuff that comes out of research that you won't be able to implement the day after. It might take a year to implement. So perhaps put that aside. And again, like I said, like pick one insight and just ask yourself, okay, this is something I can probably implement in the next week or so. And that could be, research that's coming out of staff positioning. It could be about training, how do you communicate with patrons? These are different insights that can, I'm going to say easily, for lack of a better word, that sometimes can easily be incorporated. And that may not cost you that much, that may not create, that chaos of change. So that's what my recommendation would be. If it doesn't translate into a specific change, it's not useful yet. That's kind of like my go-to.
It goes back to what you said earlier about low cost, low resource, high impact, right?
Mhm.
I
Exactly.
love it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It kind of feels like much of this is coming back to just making that information more useful for them to have attainable, for them to resource when they need it, when certain things come up. But it's not just about collecting that research, but turning it into decisions that improve the safety of the facility and the communities. I'm assuming that's going to kind of go and connect with the bigger picture of the mission that you're trying to go forward with.
Absolutely. Honestly, my mission is making prevention practical. I think that that's where I have found the need through the Swim Global Project, through research committee with AOAP, and through other work that I've been doing, is really understanding, how can we make prevention practical? And so that's my underlying principle when I do a lot of work. I don't think that we need more awareness, because I think the awareness exists. I think we need a way to make better decisions that sometimes are simpler but more impactful. So everything that I do comes back to like helping people. Right. It really does. Like all the work that I do, whether it's in drowning prevention, whether it's communications with NGOs and international development, everything that I do comes back to helping people. And I think we need to understand that what we know and actually use is in a way paralleled, right? So what is it that we know? How do we use it? And does it save lives? I think, again, very simple trajectory, like when you're planning your pipeline for, for example, training, or you're looking at your recruitment, from a recruitment perspective, using that analogy, what do we know? So from a recruitment perspective, if you're recruiting lifeguards, we know that we need 100 lifeguards this summer. We know that lifeguards are going to get paid $15 an hour. We know their certifications they need. And we know that we have to put these lifeguards at 3 different pools. Again, I'm being very generic. And then actually, how are we going to operate with 100 lifeguards? That's when the operator begins, with scheduling. What is the usage mapping of all the 3 pools? That's when the operational stuff comes in. And then you have to look at your practice. Like, how are you practicing saving lives in your community? How are you putting that into practice as an operator? So I think those are kind of interesting questions. That's what I help with.
Ties us into our next segment. So we're talking about our lessons in our leadership.
Okay.
So I'd like to zoom out a little bit. What has been your journey from university risk management work to national advocacy to global drowning prevention efforts. What has it taught you about leadership?
I think what I've learned myself is that from a 30-year trajectory, I think when I started, I felt that being a leader meant setting out examples that people had to follow. And I think there's been a shift in the workplace, but I think that's how I kind of started my career in aquatics, where it was like, this is the safety manual, this is the plan, and everyone needs to follow it because I said so. And that's being 100% honest here. And then to now being like, no, just wait a minute here. And again, full disclosure, I haven't operated a facility in, I think, 15, 16 years. So I know the workplace has changed quite a bit. But I think good leadership now for me is less about having all the answers and more about creating clarity. Also great leadership for me. Like I still have, the mentors that I looked up to and looked to from 30 years ago. I still have those people in my life that now support me with the Swim Global project. And so I think good leadership is also understanding that everyone brings value. I think we're obviously always constantly navigating uncertainty. We're always trying to figure out what the priorities are. And I think the underlying reality that we're continuously working with limited resources sometimes make us make decisions that are short-sighted. Just because we have limited resources doesn't mean that our decisions need to be limited. We can still think big, right? And so I think my role now is to help people focus on what really matters and keep moving forward, even when things aren't perfect. I think that's what I'm trying to do with the Swim Global project. And I really truly believe that the people that you're surrounded with are going to be the representation of who you are. But it's a great one. I mean, leadership is it's such a fluid word, right?
I was just at a conference where people were complaining about their young staff, but I think you hit on something, right? That leadership is fluid, and part of the way we're moving now is we have to help our team understand the why behind what we're doing, which may take some time, but frankly, it also makes us better leaders and better advocates for what we need. Kind of as we think about that, what role do you think that curiosity plays in good leadership, especially for leaderships who want to keep learning and improving rather than just relying on the ways that they've always done it?
Oh, right. I mean, the role of I think it's everything. I think again, when we're constantly being told there's limited resources, we don't have funding, we can't get more staff, or there's going to be cuts, or we can't change those life jackets even though they're falling apart, right? When we're being bombarded with the reason why we cannot do something, you create that mindset with your team. So when you're constantly sharing why you cannot do something, then your team becomes the why they can't do something, right? So I think again, it's a culture, it's a mindset. Yeah, you said something really interesting, like we've always done it this way. Oh boy, right? That's like might as well close shop. If you've always done it this way, you're obviously not looking to the future, and you're not looking for innovation, and you're not looking for ways to improve anything in your operation. So might as well just lock up and go home, right? That's my philosophy. Might sound harsh, but as an entrepreneur, as someone that, runs a Swim Global project, that runs a consulting business, that sits on several boards, I think that if I'm not looking forward, then I'm not looking to make things better in our space. And we can make things better every single day, even when we have limited resources. And so I think everything that we do impacts our teams, it impacts safety, and I think it impacts mindset. And you have to, if you do, if you do run a facility where staff or teams are counting on you for direction, you should really be on the forefront of that. And maybe that's hard, right? Sometimes to always be thinking about what's the next best thing. So find the players on your team that are the curious ones, that are looking for new ideas. Don't see it as competition. See it as, oh my God, this is amazing. I have this new lifeguard that's coming in, and all they want to do is create new programming and, A, B, and C. Wow, that's amazing. If you can have someone that has that curious mind, help to nurture it. That also is part of good leadership.
For sure. Um, for an aquatic professional who may not have some of the global connections, but like you said, wants to make that local impact, wants to take that next step. What's a good starting point that you recommend?
In what way? Like they want to,
I feel like, and they want to, I guess, take that next step in terms of they've already kind
like
of
they feel like they've
used their
plateaued.
resources at their facility.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So they feel like they've plateaued. I would say, if they can find a neighboring colleague, or if they can start looking at what else is being done around them, for new ideas, I think that could be a really good starting point. I think that there's so many things that can be done. Let's say if you don't have too many constraints, of course, but if you feel like you've plateaued within your facility or your operation, I would say ask your team, right? Like you have maybe 20 brains or 100 brains coming into work every day. Ask your team what they would like to do. Because when your team is able to take ownership on something new, I think that also shifts, the kind of like that attachment, right, to your facility or your program. So I get it. Like, season after season, you're doing the same thing, trying to expand, but the schedule, like I totally get it. I mean, it's a rotating door as well with staff. And so ask your team what they would like to see at their pool. I mean, of course, I mean, if they're complaining that, hey, you know what, doesn't seem to be anything new, be like, you know what, why don't let us know what you want? What would you like to see? So that's that might be an easy fix, I think.
I love that. And I think the other reason that we sometimes feel like we're plateaued or stuck is because resources, staff, and let's be honest, the political agendas within our communities or our
Mm.
organizations or our businesses sometimes make us feel like we can only go so far. So, how do you recommend for aquatic professionals ways that they can maintain that safety and water safety education are a priority when they're kind of up against those things continuously?
I think, find motivation outside your operation. Continue to try to get educated, maybe in other areas. Get involved with your community's maybe public health committee. Get involved with your municipality's workplace safety group. I think there's ways that individuals can really kind of look at the broader scope of their operation, and for them to understand that their operation on a larger scale has a huge impact in the community. I think that, I challenge everyone listening to this podcast is get to know the people that are coming through your door. Remember their names. Remember, what lane they like to swim in. Remember how many kids they bring, on that Saturday morning. And so instead of sitting in the office, and I know that we have a lot of administrative work that we have to do, but be super intentional with how you work. And I think building relationships with people is a really important step to expanding how you see your operation. So I think being intentional, building relationships with people that are coming through your door and getting to know them on a personal level is what's really going to enhance your experience. Because I didn't think I was going to stay in this space. I mean, I wrote my LSATs. I thought I was going to be a lawyer and that was it. I mean, maybe I still have it in me, but I definitely don't want to be a lawyer. I know lots of lawyers now that are like, no way, don't ever do it. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I want people to really enjoy the work that they're doing, working at a facility. Like, remember why you started too, right? Like I started to lifeguard because I thought, hey, it's going to be fun. I'm going to make some money and I'm going to get a great tan because I'm going to work at the beach. So, so fun as a 16, 17-year-old. But like I said, I stayed for the mission. And then I found that the work was just so enriching, but it's because of the people and the relationships I've built. And it doesn't happen overnight.
Definitely doesn't. It's definitely about the people. It's the reason I've been in the aquatic industry for over 20 years. It's for sure the people. So, all right, we're going to do a lightning round. Okay, so we got some
Okay.
quick questions for you. We're looking for just quick answers. All right. What's one small change any aquatic facility could make this month to be more safer?
Reevaluate their scanning zones perhaps and lifeguard positioning. Just one shift in rotation can make a small adjustment for a big difference. So for example, if you're rotating every 30 minutes, maybe rotate every 20 minutes. So I would say that would be one small change.
I love it. What's a training tool or resource that you think every aquatic professional should know about?
Resource. I think that every aquatic professional that is especially managing a facility should know how to read their aquatic logs. So their, mechanical rooms, they should really understand how their mechanical rooms work. I'm a big believer that in aquatics, the saying, oh, it's not my job, I don't need to know it, is not acceptable. I think everybody should understand what everybody does. So that would be my recommendation for a resource.
Okay. What is your favorite part of working in aquatics or global advocacy?
Oh my gosh, I think you mentioned it, Daniel. It's the people. That is my favorite part is, like I mentioned, I have over 45 ambassadors worldwide, and most of them I haven't even met, but I feel so connected to them because we meet monthly. We have a WhatsApp group and we just have built community. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the work that we all do is that we're building community, right? Think about all the connections that you've built over the years and the people that have connected because you hired them, right? So we're building community. I think that's my favorite.
That's
That
awesome.
shared, yeah, so it's that shared mental fortitude of that same concept that we all are trying to have that same end goal. So that's love to hear that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Nathalie, if you could give your younger professional self, maybe the one who's just starting advocacy work, one piece of advice, what would it be?
It would be that this is not a race, it is a marathon and it takes time and dedication and be really intentional. Small steps win the race. That's what I would say.
All right, Nathalie, thank you so much for joining and sharing your experience, wisdom, and global perspective with the AOAP community.
Aw. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Nathalie, we especially appreciate the way you've helped connect research and communication and collaboration to the real operational decisions that aquatic professionals are making every day.
Thank you. So much more. I'm so excited.
I know.
So
So if there's anything
excited.
you want, if there's anything you want us for our listeners, we're going to link Nathalie's work, including the Swim Global Project, Life Saving Society Canada initiatives, and relevant AOAP resources in the show notes.
And
Amazing.
Nathalie, when we started this, we said we wanted professionals who were listening to take at least one actionable item. And I'll tell you, Daniel and I just have been making notes through this, and I have like 5 things written down. And the most important on my list is how does this change that I want to make impact how I operate tomorrow? So, I mean, what a sentence to just write down and leave on your computer as a reminder of what you're doing. I love it. So, listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with another aquatic professional and keep the conversation going in your networks.
Awesome.
To learn more about AOAP's training, conference opportunities, and drowning prevention resources, visit aquaticpros.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on AOAP Discussion from the Deep End podcast, made for aquatic professionals by aquatic professionals.